The winter wind cut through the thin walls of the small house like a knife. Joseph Crowfeather pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders as he sat beside his wife's bed. Maria had been fighting the sickness for 3 months now, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. The tuberculosis had taken so much from her already. Her once bright eyes had dimmed to tired shadows. Her strong hands, which used to weave the most beautiful baskets on the San Carlos reservation, now lay still and pale on the worn quilt. Even her voice, which used to fill their home with laughter and Apache lullabies, had become nothing more than a whisper. "The children," she breathed, her eyes finding his in the dim lamplight. "Promise me you'll take care of them." Joseph nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Outside their bedroom, he could hear their 3 little ones sleeping. 8-year-old Ayana, 5-year-old Dakota, and 2-year-old Koa had no idea that their world was about to change forever. When Maria took her last breath just before dawn, Joseph felt something break inside his chest. It wasn't just his heart. It was everything he had built his life around. Maria wasn't just his wife. She was the center of their family, the one who knew exactly what to do when the children scraped their knees or had bad dreams. She was the one who made their simple government house feel like a real home. The funeral was held 3 days later following the old Apache ways. The whole reservation came to pay their respects. Maria had been loved by everyone who knew her. She helped deliver babies, cared for the sick, and always had food ready for anyone who knocked on her door. Now she was gone, and Joseph didn't know how to fill the enormous hole she had left behind. The real pain started after everyone went home. That first night without Maria, Joseph sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee in his hands. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Then he heard it, a small whimpering sound coming from the children's room. He found Ayana curled up in the corner where Maria used to sit and work on her baskets. The little girl was trying so hard not to cry that her whole body was shaking. When she saw her father, she looked up with eyes full of confusion and hurt. "Where did Mama go?" she whispered. "When is she coming back?" Joseph knelt down beside his daughter, his own eyes burning with tears he was trying to hold back. He had explained death to her before, when her grandmother passed away 2 years ago. But explaining and understanding are 2 different things, especially when you're 8 years old and your whole world just disappeared. "She's not coming back, sweet girl," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "She's with the ancestors now." But Ayana didn't understand ancestors. She only understood that her mama, who had braided her hair every morning and sung to her every night, was gone. She began to cry then, deep sobs that seemed too big for her small body. From the next room, they heard Dakota calling out in his sleep. "Mama, Mama, where are you?" Joseph's heart broke a little more. His 5-year-old son had always been a mama's boy. Maria used to joke that Dakota was attached to her like a shadow. Now that shadow had nothing to follow. The worst part was little Koa. At only 2 years old, he didn't understand what death meant at all. He wandered from room to room, looking behind doors and under beds, searching for his mama. When he couldn't find her, he would stand in the middle of the living room and scream until his face turned red. Nothing Joseph did seemed to help. He tried cooking the foods Maria used to make, but his clumsy attempts only made the children cry harder. The scrambled eggs were too dry. The fry bread was burned. Everything tasted wrong without her gentle touch. He tried telling them the old stories his own grandmother had shared with him when he was young. Stories about coyote and rabbit, about brave warriors and wise grandmothers, but his voice kept cracking with grief and the words felt hollow without Maria's warmth to give them life. The days blended together in a haze of sadness and struggle. Joseph had to go back to work at the reservation's small trading post after a week. He needed the money. The funeral had taken most of their small savings and he still had 3 children to feed. But leaving them felt like abandoning them all over again. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Running Bear, offered to watch the children during the day. She was a kind woman with grandchildren of her own, but she was also tired and not used to handling 3 grieving little ones. When Joseph came home each evening, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the growing wildness in his children's. Ayana had stopped talking to anyone except her brothers. She spent most of her time sitting in Maria's favorite chair, staring out the window with empty eyes. Sometimes Joseph would catch her having conversations with someone who wasn't there, and his heart would sink a little deeper. Dakota began wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 3. He would wake up screaming from nightmares, crying for his mama to come and make the scary things go away. Joseph would hold him and rock him, but it wasn't the same. His rough hands couldn't smooth away fears the way Maria's gentle touch had. Little Koa seemed to be getting smaller every day. He refused to eat most of the food Joseph prepared, pushing away his plate and asking for mama food. He developed a cough that wouldn't go away, and his round baby cheeks began to look hollow and pale. The other families on the reservation tried to help. They brought casseroles and offered to take the children for afternoons, but their kindness only seemed to remind Joseph's children of what they had lost. Other mothers would try to comfort them, and the children would pull away, confused and hurt that these women weren't their mama. Winter dragged on, cold and merciless. The small house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth became a place of tears and silence. Joseph felt like he was drowning, watching his children slip away from him a little more each day. He had always been a strong man. Apache men were taught to be tough, to provide for their families and protect them from harm. But how could he protect his children from grief? How could he fight an enemy he couldn't see or touch? Some nights, after the children finally cried themselves to sleep, Joseph would sit on his front porch and look up at the stars scattered across the desert sky. His grandfather had taught him that the ancestors lived up there, watching over their families. He wondered if Maria was up there too, looking down at the mess he was making of everything she had worked so hard to build. The guilt was almost worse than the grief. He should be able to comfort his children. He should know how to make them smile again. He should be enough for them, but every day proved that he wasn't. Every tear they shed, every meal they refused, every night they cried for their mama showed him how completely he was failing them. Spring came early that year, but it brought no relief to the Crow Feather house. If anything, the warming weather made everything worse. Maria had loved spring. She used to take the children on long walks to gather wild plants for her medicines and dyes for her baskets. She would point out the first tender shoots of new grass and help them count the different kinds of birds returning from their winter journeys. Now spring felt like a mockery. How could the world keep growing and changing when their world had stopped completely? Joseph knew something had to change. His children were disappearing before his eyes, becoming hollow versions of the bright, happy kids they used to be. But he didn't know what to do. He didn't know where to turn. All he knew was that his family was breaking apart, and he was powerless to stop it. The trading post where Joseph worked was a simple place that sold basic supplies to families on the reservation. Flour, sugar, canned goods, work clothes, and simple tools. He had worked there for 5 years ever since Koa was born, and they needed the steady income. The job was quiet and familiar, which had once been a comfort. Now the silence just gave him too much time to think. His boss, Mr. Standing Bear, was a patient man who understood that Joseph was struggling. He didn't complain when Joseph's mind wandered or when he had to leave early because one of the children was sick. But Joseph could see the concern in the older man's eyes. "You need help," Mr. Standing Bear said one afternoon as Joseph stood behind the counter, staring out the window, without really seeing anything, so those children need more than one person can give. Joseph nodded, but what kind of help was there? His own parents had died when he was young. Maria's family lived 3 states away and had their own struggles. The reservation had services for families in crisis, but they were stretched thin and couldn't provide the kind of daily care and love his children needed. What his children needed was a mother. But Maria was gone, and Joseph couldn't imagine ever loving anyone else the way he had loved her. The very thought felt like a betrayal of her memory. As the weeks passed, Joseph realized he was going to have to make a choice. He could keep struggling alone, watching his children fade away a little more each day. Or he could swallow his pride and ask for help, even if he didn't know what kind of help was possible. The decision came to him on a particularly difficult night in late spring. Little Koa had been crying for 2 hours straight, calling for his mama and refusing to be comforted. Dakota was hiding under his bed, too scared to come out even for dinner. Ayana sat in her corner, rocking back and forth like an old woman who had seen too much sorrow. 3 months had passed since Maria's death, and Joseph felt like he was watching his children disappear right in front of his eyes. Each day brought new heartbreak, new proof that he wasn't enough to heal the wounds that losing their mother had left behind. Ayana had become a ghost of herself. The little girl who used to chatter constantly about everything she saw and learned had stopped speaking almost entirely. She would spend hours sitting in Maria's old chair, staring out the arbor window with empty eyes. When Joseph tried to talk to her, she would look right through him as if he wasn't even there. The only time she showed any life was when she was taking care of her younger brothers. She had appointed herself as their protector, bringing them water when they were thirsty, covering them with blankets when they fell asleep on the couch. But it was too much responsibility for an 8-year-old girl. Joseph could see the weight of it in her small shoulders, the way she moved like someone much older and more tired than she should be. Dakota's nightmares were getting worse instead of better. Almost every night, Joseph would wake up to the sound of his 5-year-old son screaming. When he rushed to the boy's room, he would find Dakota sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with terror, calling for his mama to save him from monsters that existed only in his dreams. "The scary things are back, Papa," Dakota would whisper, his whole body shaking. "Mama always made them go away. Where is Mama?" Joseph would hold his son and rock him back and forth, the way Maria used to do. But his rough hands and deep voice couldn't provide the same comfort. Dakota would eventually fall back asleep, but only after exhausting himself with crying. In the morning, he would be cranky and tired, and the cycle would start all over again. The bedwetting had become a nightly occurrence. Joseph found himself doing laundry constantly, trying to keep up with the wet sheets and pajamas. He never scolded Dakota for it. He knew his son couldn't help it, but he could see the shame in the little boy's eyes every morning when they discovered another accident. Little Koa was breaking Joseph's heart in a different way. At 2 years old, he didn't really understand what death meant. He just knew that his mama, who had been the center of his world, was suddenly gone. He would wander through the house calling for her, checking all her favorite spots. "Mama, Mama," he would call, looking under beds and behind doors. When he couldn't find her, he would dissolve into tears that seemed too big for his tiny body. The worst part was watching Koa wait by the window every evening around the time Maria used to come home from her errands. He would press his little nose against the glass and watch for her familiar figure walking up the path. When she didn't appear, he would cry himself to sleep. Koa had also started refusing most of the food Joseph prepared. He would push away his plate and ask for mama food, which meant the special dishes Maria used to make just for him. Joseph tried to recreate her recipes, but everything he made tasted wrong. The little boy was getting thinner and his constant cough wasn't getting any better. Joseph's job at the trading post had become both a blessing and a curse. He needed the income desperately. Single parenthood was expensive and he was already behind on several bills. But leaving his children every day felt like abandoning them when they needed him most. Mrs. Running Bear, their elderly neighbor, continued to watch the children during the day. She was a kind woman with a big heart. But she was also 73 years old and not used to dealing with 3 grieving children. Joseph could see the exhaustion in her face when he picked up the kids each evening. "They're good children," she would tell him, but her voice was tired. They just miss their mama so much. Some days Joseph would come home to find Mrs. Running Bear sitting in a chair with little Koa on her lap, both of them looking worn out from crying. Other days he would find Dakota hiding under the kitchen table, while Ayana tried to coax him out with promises of cookies or toys. The house itself seemed to be mourning Maria's absence. Her baskets still sat in the corner where she used to work on them, but they were gathering dust now. Her favorite coffee cup sat unwashed in the sink because Joseph couldn't bring himself to clean it. It still smelled faintly of the herbal tea she loved to drink in the mornings. Her clothes still hung in their shared closet, and sometimes Joseph would catch one of the children standing in front of the open doors, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume that still clung to the fabric. He knew he should probably pack her things away, but he couldn't bring himself to erase those last traces of her presence. The community on the reservation continued to offer help, but their kindness sometimes made things worse. Well-meaning neighbors would invite the children over for dinner, thinking that being around other families would cheer them up. But seeing other mothers with their children only reminded Joseph's kids of what they had lost. One evening, Mrs. Yazzie from down the road brought over a pot of stew and offered to braid Ayana's hair. It was a simple gesture of kindness, but Ayana recoiled as if she had been burned. "No," she cried, backing away from the woman. "Only Mama braids my hair." Mrs. Yazzie looked hurt and confused, and Joseph felt terrible having to explain that. His daughter hadn't let anyone touch her hair since Maria died. It was growing tangled and wild, but Ayana wouldn't let him near it either. The reservation's social services department had started checking in on the family regularly. A nice woman, named Ms. Begay, would stop by once a week to see how they were doing. She would ask the children questions about their feelings and offer resources like grief counseling or temporary childcare assistance. But the children wouldn't talk to her. They had learned not to trust strangers, especially ones who asked too many questions. They would hide behind Joseph or run to their rooms when she arrived, leaving him to explain that they were doing fine, when clearly they were anything but. Joseph knew that Ms. Begay was concerned about their situation. He could see it in the way she looked around their house, taking note of the unwashed dishes, the unmade beds, the general chaos that had become their normal. He worried that she might decide the children would be better off somewhere else, in foster care or with relatives who lived far away. The thought of losing his children on top of losing his wife was terrifying. They were all he had left of the life he and Maria had built together. But he was starting to wonder if maybe the social worker was right. Maybe they would be better off with someone who actually knew how to take care of them. At work, Joseph's co-workers tried to be supportive, but they didn't know what to say either. Men on the reservation didn't usually talk about their feelings or ask for help with family problems. They were expected to be strong, to handle whatever life threw at them without complaining. But Joseph didn't feel strong. He felt like he was drowning, struggling to keep his head above water while his children sank deeper into their grief. Every day was a battle just to get them fed and dressed and through another day without their mother. His own grief was something he had to deal with alone late at night when the children were finally asleep. That's when he would allow himself to cry for Maria, to miss her laugh and her wisdom and the way she always knew exactly what to do in any situation. He missed having someone to share the burden with. Maria had been his partner in everything, from paying bills to disciplining the children to planning for their future. Now he was making all the decisions alone, and he was terrified of making the wrong choices. The worst moments came when one of the children would ask him a question he couldn't answer, like when Dakota wanted to know why God had taken his mama away, or when little Koa asked if Mama was ever coming back from her long trip. Joseph didn't have answers for those questions. He barely understood what had happened himself. Spring was slowly giving way to early summer, but the changing seasons brought no relief to their household. If anything, the warmer weather made their sadness more obvious. Other families were spending time outside, having picnics and playing games in their yards. Joseph's children stayed inside, too withdrawn to enjoy the sunshine. One particularly difficult evening in late May, everything came to a head. Little Koa had been crying for 3 hours straight. Nothing Joseph did could comfort him. Dakota was having another nightmare-fueled meltdown, and Ayana was sitting in her corner, rocking back and forth like she was trying to comfort herself. Joseph felt completely overwhelmed. He wanted to cry, to scream, to run away from the impossible situation he found himself in. But he couldn't do any of those things because he was the only parent his children had left. That's when he remembered what his grandfather had taught him about prayer. His grandfather, who had died when Joseph was 15, had been a traditional man who believed in the old ways. He had taught Joseph that when life became too difficult to handle alone, it was time to seek guidance from the spirits and ancestors. Sometimes a man's problems are too big for him to solve by himself, his grandfather had said. That's when He needs to humble himself and ask for help from those who came before him. Joseph had been raised in both the traditional Apache way and the Christian faith that the missionaries had brought to the reservation. He didn't see any conflict between the two. Both taught that there was a higher power who cared about human suffering and could provide. 3 days after Joseph's prayer on the mesa, the morning started like any other. He woke up early to make breakfast for the children, though getting them to eat had become a daily struggle. Ayanna picked at her scrambled eggs without really eating them. Dakota sat at the table but spent most of his time staring out the window. Little Koa refused to sit in his high chair and wandered around the kitchen with a piece of toast he wasn't really interested in eating. Joseph was washing dishes when he heard the sound of an old truck engine struggling up the dusty road that led to their house. Living on the reservation, visitors were common, neighbors stopping by to check on each other, delivery trucks bringing supplies to the trading post, or social workers making their rounds. But this engine sounded different, more strained, like it was fighting just to keep running. Through the kitchen window, he watched as a beat-up pickup truck came into view, trailing a cloud of dust and making concerning noises. The truck was old, probably from the 1940s, painted a faded blue that had seen better days. Steam was rising from under the hood, and the engine was making a knocking sound that meant serious trouble. The truck shuddered to a stop in front of their house, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened with a loud creak, and out stepped a woman Joseph had never seen before. She was somewhere in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a flower print dress that looked like it had been carefully mended in several places. She had the kind of face that looked like it smiled often, though right now she appeared worried and a little embarrassed about her truck's dramatic arrival. Joseph dried his hands on a dish towel and stepped outside, curious about this unexpected visitor. The woman was looking under the hood of her truck where steam was still rising from the overheated engine. "Excuse me," she called out when she saw him approaching. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but my truck just broke down. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call for help." Her voice had a slight accent that Joseph couldn't quite place, maybe Mexican or New Mexican, with the warm tones of someone who had grown up speaking both Spanish and English. There was something gentle about the way she spoke, like she was used to talking to children or nervous animals. "Of course," Joseph replied. "Now please come in." As they walked toward the house, the woman introduced herself. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez. I was driving from Los Angeles to Santa Fe to stay with my sister, but I guess my old truck had other plans." "Joseph Crow Feather," he replied, holding the door open for her. "And don't worry about the truck. These things happen." The moment Carmen stepped into the house, everything changed. Little Koa, who had been wandering aimlessly around the living room, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the stranger. Instead of running to hide behind his father like he usually did with visitors, he tilted his head to one side and studied her with serious 2-year-old eyes. Carmen knelt down to his level and smiled. "Hello there, little one. What's your name?" Something miraculous happened then. For the first time since his mother's death, Koa smiled back. It wasn't a big smile, just a tiny lifting of the corners of his mouth, but it was genuine. Joseph felt his heart skip a beat. "Koa," the little boy whispered, taking a step closer to this stranger, who somehow didn't feel strange at all. "Koa," Carmen repeated, her voice warm with approval. "That's a beautiful name. Do you know what it means?" The little boy shook his head, suddenly shy but still standing close to her. "It means brave," Carmen told him. "You must be a very brave little boy." From the kitchen doorway, Ayanna appeared, drawn by the sound of voices. She had been hiding in the pantry, her usual response to visitors, but something about Carmen's voice had made her curious enough to peek out. Carmen looked up and saw the 8-year-old girl watching her with cautious eyes. "And you must be Koa's big sister," she said, not moving from her crouched position so she wouldn't seem intimidating. Ayanna nodded, but didn't speak. She hadn't said more than a few words to any stranger since her mother died. "I bet you take very good care of your little brother," Carmen continued. "I can tell just by looking at you that you're a wonderful big sister." Something in Carmen's tone, Or maybe just the fact that she recognized Ayana's role as protector made the little girl take a small step into the room. Dakota appeared next, peeking around the corner from the hallway. At 5 years old, he was the most curious of the three children, but also the most easily frightened since his mother's death. He hung back, watching the stranger with wide eyes. Carmen seemed to understand that she needed to let the children come to her at their own pace. She didn't rush toward them or try to force interaction. Instead, she simply sat down on the floor, making herself less imposing, and continued talking to Joseph about her truck trouble. "I was hoping to reach Santa Fe today," she explained. "My sister is expecting me, but I guess I'll need to call her and let her know I'm delayed." As she talked, something wonderful began to happen. The children started to relax in a way Joseph hadn't seen since before Maria got sick. Little Koa moved, closer and closer until he was standing right next to Carmen, close enough to touch her dress. Ayana came all the way into the room and sat down in her mother's old chair. But instead of staring out the window, she was watching Carmen with interested eyes. Even Dakota ventured closer, though he stayed near his father, ready to run if needed. Joseph showed Carmen to the phone in the kitchen, and she called the local garage. The conversation was short and not particularly encouraging. "Well," she said when she hung up, "the mechanic can come look at it, but he can't get here until this afternoon, and if it needs parts, which it probably does, it could be several days before it's fixed." She looked genuinely distressed by this news. "I hate to impose, but I don't suppose there's a motel or a boarding house nearby where I could stay." Joseph almost laughed at the question, but not in a mean way. "The nearest motel is about 50 miles from here. Most folks on the reservation put up travelers when they need help." The idea came to him suddenly, and before he could second-guess himself, he offered, "You're welcome to stay here until your truck is fixed. We have a spare room and it's no trouble." Carmen looked surprised by the offer. "That's very kind of you, but I couldn't impose on your family like that." "It's not an imposition," Joseph assured her. "We help each other out here. Besides," he glanced toward the living room where his children were still watching Carmen with fascination, "I think they like you." And it was true. In the 15 minutes since Carmen had arrived, Joseph's children had shown more life and interest than they had in months. Little Koa was actually playing with his toys instead of just carrying them around aimlessly. Ayana was sitting up straight, instead of curled in on herself. Even Dakota had come fully into the room and was building something. With his blocks, Carmen seemed to notice it too. "Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble? I can help around the house, cook meals, whatever you need." The mention of cooking made Joseph realize how much he had been struggling with that particular task. His attempts at preparing meals had been disasters more often than successes, and the children had been eating mostly sandwiches and canned soup for weeks. "Actually," he said, "that would be a big help. I'm not much of a cook." So it was settled. Carmen would stay in the spare room until her truck was repaired and she could continue her journey to Santa Fe. The mechanic arrived that afternoon, a grizzled man named Pete, who had been fixing cars and trucks on the reservation for 30 years. He spent about 10 minutes looking at Carmen's engine before delivering the bad news. "She's blown a head gasket," he announced, wiping his greasy hands on an even greasier rag. "Going to need parts ordered from Phoenix. Best case scenario, we're talking a week. More likely 2. Carmen's face fell. "2 weeks? Oh no, my sister is expecting me. She's already made arrangements. I can call around, see if I can find the parts faster," Pete offered. "But I can't make any promises. This is an old truck and parts for it aren't exactly common." After Pete left with the truck in tow, Carmen sat on the front porch looking genuinely worried. Joseph brought her a cup of coffee and sat down beside her. "I'm so sorry about this," she said. "You're being incredibly kind to a complete stranger." "Like I said, we help each other out here," Joseph replied. "Besides, you're not exactly a stranger anymore." It was true. In just a few hours, Carmen had somehow become part of their household in a way that felt completely natural. The children had taken to her with an ease that amazed Joseph. Even Ayana had started talking again, asking Carmen questions about where she came from and where she was going. The real magic happened at dinner time. Carmen had asked if she could cook, and Joseph had gratefully accepted. She made a simple meal of rice and beans with fresh tortillas, seasoned with spices she had brought from California. It was different from anything Maria used to cook, but it was delicious and filling. More importantly, all three children actually ate. They cleaned their plates and asked for seconds. Little Koa even sat in his high chair without complaining, too interested in the new flavors to fuss about where he was sitting. As they ate, Carmen told them stories about her journey from Los Vusi. The first morning after Carmen's arrival brought something the Crow Feather House hadn't experienced in months: the sound of children laughing at breakfast. Joseph woke up to unfamiliar noises coming from the kitchen. Instead of the usual crying or silence, he heard the clatter of pans, the sound of something sizzling, and most amazingly, the giggle of little Koa responding to someone speaking to him in gentle Spanish. When Joseph walked into the kitchen, he found a scene that seemed almost too good to be true. Carmen was standing at the stove making pancakes while little Koa sat in his high chair, actually eating pieces of banana and chattering happily. Ayana was setting the table, something she used to do to help her mother but hadn't done since Maria's death. Dakota was building a tower out of blocks near the window, humming to himself. "Good morning," Carmen said with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind that I started breakfast. The children were up early and I thought you could use the sleep." Joseph rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was still dreaming. His children looked relaxed and happy. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon instead of sadness and burnt coffee. For a moment he felt guilty for feeling so relieved. Was it wrong to be grateful that a stranger could do what he hadn't been able to do for his own children? But Carmen seemed to read his thoughts. "They're not different children," she said quietly while the kids were distracted. "They're the same wonderful kids they've always been. They just needed someone to remind them that it's okay to be happy sometimes, even when they're sad." The pancakes were a huge success. All three children ate enthusiastically, with Koa managing to get more food in his mouth than on his clothes for the first time in weeks. Ayana even asked for seconds, something she hadn't done since before her mother got sick. As Joseph got ready for work, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace of mind about leaving his children. He still felt sad about going, but he wasn't consumed with worry about what kind of emotional state he would find them in when he returned. Carmen walked him to the door, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Don't worry about anything," she said. "We'll be fine." "I feel like I should be paying you," Joseph said, only half joking. "You've done more for them in 12 hours than I've been able to do in 3 months. Carmen shook her head. "You're giving me a place to stay when I'm stranded. We're helping each other." But Joseph could see something deeper in her eyes. Carmen wasn't just being polite or returning a favor. She genuinely cared about his children already, and they cared about her too. At work that day, Joseph found himself actually able to concentrate on his tasks for the first time since Maria's death. He wasn't constantly worried about whether his children were okay, whether they were crying, whether Mrs. Running Bear was overwhelmed trying to care for them. Mr. Standing Bear noticed the difference immediately. "You look better today," the older man observed. "More rested." "A friend is helping with the children," Joseph explained, not sure how else to describe Carmen's presence in their lives. When Joseph came home that evening, he was greeted by more amazing sights. The house was clean, but not in a frantic way. It looked lived in and comfortable. The children were all playing quietly, and there was a delicious smell coming from the kitchen. Carmen had spent the day learning about each child's individual needs and interests. She had discovered that Ayana loved to draw but had stopped because her pictures always made her think of her mother. Carmen had sat with her and encouraged her to draw new things: flowers, animals, imaginary places, helping her rediscover joy in creating without the painful associations. She had learned that Dakota's nightmares often involved feeling lost and unable to find his family. So she had spent time during the day playing hide-and-seek games where he was always found quickly, games that were fun but also helped him feel secure about not being lost or abandoned. With little Koa, Carmen had noticed that he missed the physical comfort of being held and cuddled. She had spent much of the day carrying him around while she did housework, letting him help with simple tasks like sorting socks or putting spoons away. The constant gentle contact seemed to soothe something deep inside him. Dinner that night was another revelation. Carmen had made a simple stew with vegetables from her own supplies, but she had involved the children in preparing it. Ayanna had helped wash vegetables. Dakota had stirred the pot. Even Koa had helped by putting dinner rolls on a plate. The meal felt like a celebration, not because anything special had happened, but because they were together and everyone was eating and talking. The children told Joseph about their day with excitement, sharing details about the stories Carmen had told them and the games they had played. "Carmen knows how to make animals out of shadows on the wall," Dakota announced, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "She made a rabbit and a bird and a wolf." "She showed me how to braid grass," Ayanna added, holding up a small braid she had made. "Just like Mama used to do with her baskets." The mention of their mother didn't bring tears this time. Carmen had somehow helped them find a way to remember Maria with love instead of only sadness. The second day brought more healing. Carmen suggested they take a walk around the reservation, something the children hadn't done since their mother's death. They had been staying close to home, afraid to venture far from the only place that still held traces of Maria's presence. But, with Carmen, they felt brave enough to explore. She pointed out birds and plants, asked questions about Apache traditions, and listened with genuine interest as Ayanna shared things her mother had taught her about the desert. They visited the trading post where Joseph worked, and Carmen met Mr. Standing Bear and some of the other community members. Everyone was curious about the kind stranger who had brought such a noticeable change to the Crowfeather family. "Those children look different," Mrs. Yazzie commented to Joseph when Carmen was out of earshot. "They look like children again." It was true. In just 2 days, his kids had started to reclaim some of their childhood. They were playing, laughing, asking questions, showing curiosity about the world around them. They were still sad sometimes. Grief doesn't disappear overnight, but the sadness was no longer consuming their entire existence. The third day brought an interesting discovery. Carmen found Maria's basket-making supplies in the corner where they had been gathering dust, and instead of trying to use them herself, she asked Ayanna to teach her about the craft. "Your mama must have been very skilled," Carmen said, examining the intricate patterns in one of Maria's finished baskets. "Would you like to show me how she did this?" Ayanna hesitated at first, but then she carefully picked up some of the dried grasses and began to demonstrate the basic weaving technique her mother had taught her. As she worked, she began to share memories of sitting with Maria, learning the ancient patterns that had been passed down through generations of Apache women. Carmen listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and praising Ayanna's skill. Slowly, the painful memories began to transform into treasured ones. Instead of thinking about her mother being gone, Ayanna began to think about the beautiful legacy Maria had left behind. By the fourth day, Dakota's nightmares had decreased significantly. He was sleeping through the night more often. And when he did wake up scared, Carmen was there to comfort him. She didn't try to convince him that there was nothing to be afraid of. Instead, she acknowledged his fears and then helped him feel safe again. "Sometimes our hearts have scary dreams when we're missing someone very much," she would tell him. "But those dreams can't hurt you, and you're not alone." Little Koa's appetite had returned completely. He was eating regular meals and gaining back the weight he had lost during the months of grief. More importantly, he was talking more, babbling, constantly in the way that healthy 2-year-olds do. The fifth day brought an unexpected challenge. Koa woke up with a slight fever and was fussy and clingy. In the past, when any of the children got sick, it had sent Joseph into a panic. He would worry that he was doing something wrong, that he couldn't properly care for them without Maria's knowledge and instincts. But Carmen handled the situation with calm competence. She kept Koa comfortable, gave him plenty of fluids, and monitored his temperature without making a big fuss about it. She explained to Joseph that children often get small fevers when they're processing big emotional changes, and that it was probably a good sign that Koa felt safe enough to let his guard down and just be sick like a normal child. By evening, Koa's fever had broken, and he was back to his cheerful self. Joseph realized that having Carmen there had prevented what would normally have been a crisis from becoming anything more than a minor inconvenience. On the sixth day, something wonderful happened at the trading post. Joseph was working behind the counter when he heard a commotion outside. Through the window, he saw his 3 children running toward the store, with Carmen walking behind them at a more leisurely pace. They had come to bring him lunch, sandwiches, that they had made themselves with Carmen's guidance. But more than that, they had come because they wanted to share their good mood with him. They were excited about their morning, eager to tell him about the butterflies they had seen and the game they had played. The morning after Carmen left, Joseph woke up expecting to find his house returned to its previous state of quiet sadness. Instead, he discovered something remarkable. His children were different than they had been before Carmen's arrival. They were still sad about her leaving, but they weren't broken by it. Ayana was in the kitchen trying to make pancakes the way Carmen had shown her. The results were a little lopsided and slightly burned, but she was humming while she worked. Dakota was helping by setting the table, and little Koa was sitting in his high chair actually eating pieces of fruit instead of throwing them on the floor. "We wanted to make breakfast like Carmen did," Ayana explained when she saw her father. "She said we were big enough to help take care of the family." Joseph felt a lump form in his throat. In 1 week, Carmen had given his children something precious: the belief that they could take care of each other and contribute to their family's healing. She had helped them remember that they were capable people, not just victims of loss. As Awe, they ate their imperfect but lovingly prepared breakfast. Joseph made his decision. He was going to call Carmen that evening and tell her how much she meant to them. He didn't know what would happen after that, but he knew he had to try. The day passed with a strange mixture of normalcy and anticipation. The children missed Carmen, but they weren't devastated. They talked about her throughout the day, sharing favorite memories from the week she had spent with them. They seemed to understand that missing someone didn't have to mean falling back into hopeless grief. Joseph went to work at the trading post, but his mind was constantly on the conversation he planned to have with Carmen that evening. What would he say? How could he explain what her presence had meant to their family? How could he ask her to consider giving up her plans without seeming selfish or desperate? Mr. Standing Bear noticed his distraction. "You're thinking about that woman who helped with your children," the older man observed. It wasn't a question. Joseph nodded. "She changed everything in just 1 week. I don't know how to go back to the way things were before." "Then don't go back," Mr. Standing Bear said simply. "Sometimes the spirits send us exactly what we need, but we have to be brave enough to accept the gift." That evening, after the children were in bed, Joseph sat by the phone for a long time before gathering the courage to dial Carmen's sister's number in Santa Fe. His hands were shaking as he waited for someone to answer. "Hello?" A woman's voice said after several rings. "Hello, this is Joseph Crow Feather from the San Carlos Reservation. I'm looking for Carmen Rodriguez. She should have arrived there yesterday." "Oh yes, you must be the man who helped her when her truck broke down," the woman said warmly. "I'm Isabella, Carmen's sister. She told me all about you and your beautiful children. Let me get her for you." While he waited, Joseph could hear voices in the background, including Carmen's laugh. The sound made his heart race. Even after just 1 day, he missed her presence in his life more than he had expected. "Joseph?" Carmen's voice came on the line, and he could hear both surprise and pleasure in her tone. "Is everything okay? Are the children all right?" "They're fine," Joseph assured her quickly. "Different than before you came, but fine. Actually, that's why I'm calling." He took a deep breath and launched into the speech he had been rehearsing all day. He told her about the morning's breakfast adventure, about how the children were grieving her absence but not falling apart from it. He told her about the peace of mind he had felt knowing she was there to help care for his family. "Carmen," he said finally, "I know we barely know each other, and I know you have your own life to live. But what happened this week it was like an answer to prayer. My children are healing because of you. And if I'm being completely honest, so am I." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Joseph's heart pounded as he waited for her response. "Joseph," Carmen said softly, "I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest about my situation." Joseph's stomach dropped. Was she married? Running from the law? Something worse? "When I told you I was going to Santa Fe to help my sister with her new baby," Carmen continued, "that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The real reason I left Los Angeles was because I couldn't figure out how to build a life there without my husband. Everything reminded me of him, of the dreams we had that would never come true." She paused, and Joseph could hear her taking a shaky breath. "I thought if I went somewhere new, started over completely, maybe I could find a way to be happy again. But this week with your family, Joseph, I haven't felt this useful, this needed, this much like myself in 2 years. Taking care of your children, helping them heal. It gave me a purpose I didn't know I was looking for." "What are you saying?" Joseph asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying that maybe we both found something we needed," Carmen replied. "I'm saying that if you're asking what I think you're asking, my answer is yes." The relief that washed over Joseph was so intense he had to sit down. "Are you sure? I mean, we barely know each other. This is crazy." Carmen laughed, and the sound was like music. "It is crazy, but sometimes the best things in life are crazy. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to trust what feels right, even when it doesn't make logical sense." They talked for another hour, making plans and sharing dreams and fears. Carmen would stay in Santa Fe for 2 weeks to help her sister as promised, but then she would return to the reservation. They would take things slowly, get to know each other properly, see if the connection they had felt during that magical week could grow into something lasting. "There's one more thing," Carmen said before they hung up. "When my truck broke down in front of your house, it wasn't random. I had been driving for hours, getting more and more lost when I saw your house. Something about it just felt right, like I was supposed to stop there." Joseph thought about his prayer on the mesa, about asking for a woman who could help his children heal. "Maybe you were supposed to stop there," he said quietly. 2 weeks later, Carmen's truck pulled up in front of the Crow Feather house again. But this time it wasn't smoking or making alarming noises. This time she came with suitcases and boxes, with the intention of staying. The children's reaction was everything Joseph had hoped for and more. They ran to her with squeals of delight, competing for her attention and talking over each other in their excitement to tell her everything that had happened while she was gone. "We made pancakes every morning," Ayana announced proudly. "They got better each time." "I only had 2 bad dreams while you were gone," Dakota added. "And Papa sang to me when I woke up, just like you showed him." Little Koa simply attached himself to Carmen's leg and refused to let go, as if he was afraid she might disappear again if he wasn't holding on tight enough. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, Joseph marveled at how right everything felt. The children were playing happily in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm evening breeze. Carmen sat beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of her perfume, but not so close as to be improper. They were taking things slowly, getting to know each other as adults rather than just as 2 people thrown together by circumstances. But already Joseph could feel something growing between them that was different from what he had shared with Maria. It wasn't a replacement love or a second-best love. It was its own unique thing, built on mutual respect and shared purpose and the miracle of 2 broken people helping each other heal. "Do you ever wonder," Carmen asked quietly, "if this was all planned somehow? Your wife getting sick, my husband dying in the war, my truck breaking down at exactly the right moment?" Joseph considered the question. He had been wondering the same thing for weeks. "I don't know about planned," he said finally. "But I do believe that sometimes when people need each other badly enough, the universe finds a way to bring them together." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day when the desert was painted in shades of gold and red, Joseph Crowfeather and Carmen Rodriguez were married in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with Mexican customs. Ayana served as the flower girl, scattering petals from Maria's garden that Carmen had carefully tended back to life. Dakota carried the rings on a small pillow his grandmother had embroidered. Little Koa toddled down the aisle ahead of the bride, throwing rose petals with abandon and giggling at the applause from the gathered community. The ceremony was held at the sacred place on the mesa where Joseph had made his desperate prayer months earlier. As they exchanged vows under the vast desert sky, Joseph couldn't help but think about that night when he had asked for help healing his children's broken hearts. He had prayed for a woman who could help his children remember how to smile. He had received Carmen, who had done that and so much more. She had helped them learn that love could expand rather than replace, that healing didn't require forgetting, that families could be rebuilt in new and beautiful ways. Carmen's vows were simple but profound. "I promise to love your children as if they were my own," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "I promise to honor the memory of the woman who came before me while building something new with you. I promise to help our